What if the life you were fighting to survive was only a fraction of the one you were meant to live? What if a single act of kindness could unravel a secret that had been buried for decades? A secret powerful enough to rewrite your entire existence. For one waitress, exhausted by the weight of the world, a single cup of coffee offered to a stranger was about to change everything. This is a story about a tarnished silver locket, a past built on lies, and a test of character so profound it could either shatter a lonely soul or forge a destiny that was stolen at birth. The rain fell in sheets against the greasy windows of the 24-hour diner, each drop a tiny hammer against Alara's frayed nerves. It was 2 a.m., that hollow hour when the city's loneliness felt most acute. Her feet ached, a dull throb that had become the baseline of her existence. Every tip, every begrudgingly paid bill, was a tiny step toward the mountain of her mother's medical expenses. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, unforgiving glow on the cracked vinyl booths and the sticky residue on the countertops. Alara moved through it all like a ghost, her smile a well-practiced mask that hid the bone-deep weariness. Around her neck, tucked beneath her uniform, lay the only beautiful thing she owned, a small, silver locket. It was her anchor. Inside was a faded, postage-stamp-sized photo of her mother, young and radiant. The other side was empty, a hollow space meant for a father she'd never known. Her mother, now lost in the fog of illness, would only whisper that he was a good man, a man lost to time and circumstance. The locket was the only clue, the only proof he had ever existed at all. Just then, the bell above the door chimed weakly, announcing a new arrival. An old man stood dripping in the entryway, his clothes worn, his shoulders slumped under the weight of the storm and something more. He looked lost, forgotten. His eyes, though, held a flicker of something sharp and intelligent that seemed at odds with his destitute appearance. He shuffled to a booth, and Alara approached, her notepad ready. "Coffee, please," he rasped, his voice thin as autumn leaves. Alara poured him a cup, the dark liquid steaming in the cold diner. She watched him warm his hands around the mug, his gaze distant. Most customers at this hour were either drunk or desolate. He just seemed sad. An hour passed. He didn't order anything else. When she brought him the check, a meager $2, he fumbled in his pockets, a look of quiet panic crossing his face. "I seem to have forgotten my wallet," he said, his voice laced with shame. A wave of pity washed over Alara, eclipsing her own exhaustion. She saw in his tired eyes the same struggle she felt every day. "Don't you worry about it," she said, her voice soft. She took the check and tore it in half. "It's on the house, and you look like you could use a real meal." Before he could protest, she returned with a plate of eggs and toast. He ate slowly, gratefully. As she refilled his coffee, his eyes fell on the silver chain visible at her collar. "That's a beautiful locket," he said, his voice stronger now. Alara instinctively pulled it out. "It was my mother's." "May I?" he asked, his gaze intense. She nodded, and he gently took the locket in his trembling fingers, his thumb brushing over the worn engraving on the front. A single, stylized S. A shadow passed over his face, a flicker of pain so profound it made Alara catch her breath. He looked from the locket to her face, a storm of unreadable emotions in his eyes. He said nothing more, simply finished his meal, thanked her with a solemn nod, and walked back out into the rain. Moments later, a sleek black car, the kind that seemed to absorb the light around it, purred to a stop in front of the diner. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, holding an umbrella, and entered. He walked directly to Alara. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Sterling," the man said, his tone crisp and professional. "The gentleman you just served." Alara's heart stammered. "Is he all right?" "He is fine. He was conducting an experiment. My employer, Arthur Sterling, wanted to see if there was any kindness left in the city." The man placed a black business card on the counter. The name was embossed in gold. Arthur Sterling, CEO, Sterling Industries. A billionaire. A recluse nobody had seen in public for years. He was very moved by your generosity. He has also instructed me to tell you that he recognizes the engraving on your locket. He requests a meeting with you at your earliest convenience. He believes he can help you find the man you've been looking for. The world tilted on its axis. Alara stared at the card, then at the empty booth where the old man had sat. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, began to bloom in the barren landscape of her heart. The next day, Alara stood before Sterling Tower, a monument of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. It was another world, a universe away from the peeling paint and cracked linoleum of her apartment. Her diner uniform felt like a costume, marking her as an intruder in this realm of silent, immense wealth. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of marble and hushed reverence. The assistant from the night before met her and led her to a private elevator that ascended without a sound, the city shrinking below them. The penthouse office was larger than her entire apartment building. One wall was a solid pane of glass, offering a god's-eye view of the metropolis. And behind a vast mahogany desk sat the man from the diner. He was no longer a frail, shivering figure. He wore an impeccably tailored suit. His gray hair was perfectly coiffed, and the sharp intelligence in his eyes was now backed by an undeniable aura of power. This was Arthur Sterling. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice now a rich baritone. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't understand. Last night I wasn't looking for a meal. I was looking for a reason to believe in people again," he explained, his eyes holding a deep, abiding sadness. "You gave me one. But that is not the only reason you are here." He gestured to a chair. "Your locket. I knew the woman who owned one just like it. Her name was Lena." Alara sank into the plush leather, her hands trembling. "Lena is my mother's name." A pained expression crossed Arthur's face. "I knew her. A long time ago. We were very close. She disappeared from my life without a word. I spent years trying to find her, but it was as if she had vanished from the face of the earth." He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto hers. "I never knew she had a child. Your mother told you nothing of your father?" "Only that he was lost to her," Alara said, the words catching in her throat. "She fell ill a few years ago. Her memory, it comes and goes. She can't tell me more." Arthur nodded slowly, processing the information. "I have resources, Miss Vance. Resources I did not have all those years ago. I want to help you. I want to help you find out what happened to your father. I need to know why she left." He wasn't making a business proposition. It was a plea, a deep personal need for answers that mirrored her own. For the first time, Alara felt she wasn't just a struggling waitress, but a woman with a history, a mystery to solve. She looked at the powerful man before her and saw the same flicker of loss she saw in her own reflection. "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I want to know." The investigation began in a private library within the penthouse, a room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. Arthur pulled out a locked rosewood box. Inside were faded photographs of a smiling young man who looked like a younger, happier version of the billionaire before her. His arm wrapped around a beautiful woman with Alara's eyes. Her mother, Lena. Seeing them together, so full of life, sent a pang through Alara's heart. They looked through Arthur's old journals, searching for names, dates, anything that might point to why Lena would have suddenly fled. As they worked, a new presence made itself known. A man in his early 30s, with a cruel, handsome face and a suit that was even more expensive than Arthur's, entered the library without knocking. "Uncle," he said, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "I see you have company." His cold eyes swept over Alara, dismissing her instantly. "Julian, this is Alara Vance. A guest of mine," Arthur said, his tone guarded. "Vance?" Julian repeated, tasting the name. "I don't believe we're familiar with that family." He gave Alara a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "My uncle has a soft heart. I hope you're not taking advantage of it." Julian Sterling was Arthur's nephew and, as the sole heir to the Sterling Empire, its self-appointed guardian. From that moment on, he became a shadow at Alara's heels. He saw her not as a person with a past, but as a threat to his future. He made his disdain clear in 1,000 small ways, interrupting her conversations with Arthur, questioning her story in front of the staff, and speaking to her in a condescending tone dripping with false concern. One afternoon, as Alara was leaving, she overheard him on the phone in the hallway. "I don't care what it takes," Julian hissed into his phone. "Dig into her past. Every school record, every job, every friend. She's a grifter, I can smell it. My uncle is losing his grip, and I won't let some sob story from the gutter cheat me out of what is rightfully mine. We need to protect the family legacy." The words were a slap in the face. Legacy. Family. Words that, for her, had only ever meant a sick mother and an empty space in a locket. Julian's hostility didn't deter her. It ignited a fire within her. This was no longer just about finding her father. It was about proving she was not the person Julian thought she was. It was about claiming a history he was so desperate to deny her. The search for the truth had now become a battle for her own identity. Driven by a new resolve, Alara decided to search for answers in the one place she had control over, her own past. She went to the small, dusty storage unit that held the few possessions her mother had managed to keep over the years. It was a sad archive of a difficult life. Chipped furniture, worn clothes, boxes of yellowed hospital bills. She had been through it all a dozen times, but now she looked with new eyes, searching for anything, any clue Arthur's story might illuminate. In the very back, tucked beneath a threadbare blanket, was a small hat box she'd never paid much attention to. She pried open the brittle lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Her hands trembled as she untied the ribbon. The letters were addressed to Arthur Sterling, but the postmarks were absent. They had never been sent. The handwriting was her mother's, elegant and clear. She sat on the cold concrete floor and began to read. The story that unfolded on those pages was not one of abandonment, but of heartbreak and coercion. "My dearest Arthur," the first letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I have failed. I was visited today by a man representing your father. He was very polite, but his message was clear. I am not good enough for you. I am a distraction from your destiny. He said you had agreed that you wanted me to go." Alara's breath hitched. Another letter described Lena's shock and pain. "He told me you would deny it if I asked, that you were too kind to tell me to my face. He gave me money, Arthur. He tried to buy my silence, to buy my departure from your life. I threw it in his face, but the words had already done their work. How could I stay, knowing you felt this way?" Then came the most devastating revelation of all, in a letter dated a month after the others. "Arthur, I have just discovered the most wonderful and terrible news. I am with child. It is a part of you, a part of us, growing inside me. My first instinct was to run to you, to show you that our love created a life. But your father's words echo in my mind. He said you wanted a clean break. He said a child would ruin your future. My heart is breaking, but I cannot subject our baby to a life where she is not wanted by her own father. I must disappear, for your sake and for hers. I will love you forever, Lena." The letters fell from Alara's numb fingers. It was all a lie. Her mother hadn't left Arthur. She had been driven away by a cruel deception. And Arthur had been a victim too. He had been led to believe the love of his life had abandoned him, never knowing she carried his child. A storm of grief and rage washed over Alara, for her mother's solitary struggle, for Arthur's decades of loneliness, and for the life that had been stolen from them all. She carefully gathered the letters, her purpose now crystal clear. She had to show them to Arthur. The truth wasn't just a key to the past. It was a weapon. When Alara presented the letters to Arthur, the change in him was seismic. The sadness in his eyes hardened into a cold, focused fury. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture uglier than either of them could have imagined. But Julian was not about to let his position crumble. Seeing the letters and the profound effect they had on his uncle, He launched his final, most vicious attack. A few days later, he called a meeting with Arthur, Elara pointedly not invited. He laid a file on the mahogany desk. "Uncle, I did the digging I should have done from the start. For your protection." Inside was a fabricated dossier painting Elara as a professional con artist. Forged documents, fake testimonials from former landlords, even a digitally altered photo suggesting she had a criminal record for petty fraud. He had also hired a document specialist who claimed, in a sworn affidavit, that the ink and paper of Lena's letters were modern, clever forgeries. "She's been playing you from the moment she saw you," Julian said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "It's a classic long con. The locket, the letters. It's all a performance. You have to cut her out. For the good of the company. For the good of our family." Arthur was silent for a long time, studying the file. The evidence was convincing, the logic cold and sound. His world, which had just begun to fill with a fragile new hope, was threatening to collapse again. He called Elara to his office later that day. The letters were on his desk, next to Julian's file of lies. The air was thick with tension. He didn't look at her. He looked out at the city below. "Julian believes you forged these letters. He has provided compelling evidence to suggest you are not who you say you are." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "This has become a complicated and painful affair. Perhaps it is best to let the past lie." He slid a check across the desk. It was made out to her name. The amount was for $1 million. "Take this, Elara," Arthur said, his voice heavy. "Your mother will have the best medical care money can buy. You will be free from worry for the rest of your life. All I ask is that you walk away from this. Drop the investigation. Let it be over." Elara stared at the check. It was the answer to every prayer she had ever whispered in the dead of night. It was food, rent, medicine. It was safety. It was an end to the struggle. She could take it and no one would blame her. All she had to do was give up. She thought of her mother's lonely struggle, of the love poured into those unsent letters. She thought of the truth buried for so long. She looked at Arthur's tired, conflicted face. She saw a man testing her, yes, but also a man who was terrified of being hurt again. Slowly, she reached out and picked up the check. She held it in her hands for a long moment. Then, with a steady, deliberate motion, she tore it in two, then four, and let the pieces flutter onto the desk. "My mother's love wasn't for sale," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "And neither is my father's truth." In that moment, all doubt vanished from Arthur Sterling's eyes. He had his answer. The test was over. Elara's integrity was priceless. With his faith in Elara completely restored, Arthur unleashed the full, terrifying power of his wealth and influence. He was no longer a man searching for answers, but a titan demanding them. He hired a team of the world's best private investigators, former intelligence agents who could unravel secrets buried for half a century. They descended upon the past like a storm, and the carefully constructed lies of Alastair Sterling, Arthur's formidable and ruthless father, began to crumble. They found him in a quiet retirement home, a man named Thomas, who had been Alastair's personal assistant for 40 years. At first, the old man was loyal, his lips sealed by fear and time. But Arthur's investigators presented him with irrefutable proof. Old financial records showing a large, untraceable cash withdrawal made on the day Lena disappeared, and a travel itinerary booking a one-way train ticket for Lena's mother to a town across the country. Cornered by the ghosts of his past, Thomas finally broke down, his confession spilling out in a torrent of guilt. "Alastair, he couldn't stand her," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling. "He said she was a nobody, a distraction who would weaken the Sterling bloodline. He ordered me to handle it. I was the one who went to her. I told her Arthur was done with her, that he thought she was a gold digger. We intercepted all their letters. We made each of them believe the other was the villain. But the final, most damning piece of evidence was found in the archives of the family's old law firm. A memo written by Alastair Sterling himself to his lawyer. It was a cold, pragmatic document discussing the Lena Vance situation. One line, buried in legal jargon, stopped Arthur's heart cold. The complication of her pregnancy necessitates a permanent and untraceable solution. Ensure she and the child disappear completely. He knew. His father had known about the baby. He had known, and he had deliberately and cruelly stolen not just Arthur's love, but his child. The weight of 3 decades of stolen life crashed down on him. He looked at the memo, then at Alara, who stood beside him, her face pale. He saw her mother's eyes, her resilience, her unwavering integrity. He saw the daughter he was supposed to have raised, the family he was supposed to have had. He slowly walked over to her. The weight of his grief and regret was immense, but for the first time, it was eclipsed by a powerful, surging clarity. This woman, who had shown him such kindness when he looked like he had nothing, was everything. She was the truth. She was his legacy. He looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He knew, Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. My father stole you from me. He stole my whole life. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. Lena never left me, and I never abandoned you. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the words catching in his throat as the truth was finally spoken aloud. Alara, I'm your father. The climax was not a quiet reconciliation but a public execution of lies. Arthur called an emergency meeting of the Sterling Industries Board of Directors. Julian, smug and confident, walked in expecting to witness Alara's final dismissal. Instead, he found her standing beside his uncle at the head of the long, polished table. Gentlemen, Arthur began, his voice ringing with cold authority. For the past few weeks, our company and my family have been subjected to a potential threat. My nephew, Julian, has been diligent in trying to protect us from what he perceived as a fraudulent claim. Julian preened, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. He nodded gravely. It was my duty, uncle, to protect the Sterling legacy. Indeed, Arthur said, his eyes like chips of ice. And in that spirit of protecting the true Sterling legacy, I have a few things to share. One by one, he laid it all out. He projected Lena's letters onto the screen. He played the audio recording of the former assistant's confession. He displayed the damning legal memo from his father. The boardroom was utterly silent, the directors stunned. Then Arthur turned his attention to Julian. My nephew, in his diligence, also presented me with a file of evidence against Alara. He then projected a new set of documents onto the screen. Phone records showing Julian's calls to a forger. Security footage of Julian's assistant planting the falsified evidence. An email from the document expert demanding final payment from Julian for his perjured testimony. The trap had been sprung. Julian's face went white. The smirk dissolved into a mask of pure panic. He was exposed, his web of deceit laid bare for all to see. She didn't deserve any of this. Julian finally exploded, rising from his chair. This company, this fortune, it was supposed to be mine. I was just protecting what my grandfather built. What my father built, Arthur corrected him, his voice dangerously quiet, was an empire on a lie that cost me my family. You did not try to protect it. You tried to perpetuate it. He looked at Julian, not with anger, but with a kind of weary pity. You are no longer a part of this family or this company. Security will escort you out. As Julian was led away in disgrace, Arthur turned back to the board. He placed a hand on Alara's shoulder. Gentlemen, he announced, his voice filled with pride. I would like to introduce you to my daughter and the future of this company, Alara Sterling. Justice, when it finally arrived, was swift and absolute. Julian was legally and financially excised from the Sterling Empire, a pariah undone by his own greed. Arthur formally adopted Alara, and the world's media exploded with the incredible story of the billionaire and the waitress who was his long-lost heir. But for Alara, the true victory was not in the headlines or the newfound wealth. It was in the quiet moments. It was seeing her mother, frail but lucid, being cared for in a sun-drenched private suite by the world's best doctors. the years of worry finally melting from her face. It was walking with Arthur through the gardens of his estate, filling the silence of 30 stolen years with stories, with laughter, and with tears. He was not just a billionaire, he was her father. He had her mother's eyes. One perfect afternoon, the three of them sat together in the garden. Alara's mother was smiling, a genuine, peaceful smile Alara hadn't seen in years. Arthur was watching them both, his face a portrait of quiet contentment. Alara held her locket in her hand. On one side was the faded picture of her young mother. On the other, in the space that had been empty for so long, was a new picture, one of her and Arthur, taken just last week. The two halves were finally whole. A single act of kindness, a cup of coffee given without expectation, had unlocked a life she never knew was hers. It proves that our true worth is not measured by what we have, but by what we are willing to give. How many other secrets are waiting to be uncovered, not by power or by wealth, but by a simple, honest extension of the human heart? If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspirational content.